My co-founder at GameStop and I could have been accused at GameStop of being excellent with continuous improvement because we were. But we should have been thinking change because we came in at the dawn of a new industry. We were the first software store in the world when our first store opened. And the things we did to start were right at the start. But 10 years later, every one of our kind of pillars of our business needed to be reevaluated, every single one of them. And all we were trying to do was be better, smarter, faster at what we were doing and continued to succeed. But we were missing the very large and important aspects of change.
Absolutely.
Since I've grown up, my family in the retail furniture business, I got into the department store business and I started to understand it. And I started to go into our stores and malls. I was realizing that specialty stores were popping up in the malls that were stealing our lunch at department stores. You know, stores like the Gap, all of a sudden there went our denim business. You know, Lane Bryant, there went our large size business. I could run right jewelry. There were Zales, there went our jewelry business. And I started developing a point of view about department stores. They were so fragmented with different names in each city you go to. The major department stores had a different name, even though they were owned by the same large company. So I started lobbying. I started with two things. One, we're getting our lunch taken. And if you can't see it, here's the data. And there was data that just, we were growing at 10%. Well, that was great. But the specialty stores were growing 40, 50% a year. And it was crazy. It was just very obvious what was going on. And I developed a point of view that said in any category of consumer goods that reaches measurable size being $1 billion back at that time. So a specialty channel will emerge that will end up being an important, if not dominant, channel of distribution inside that segment. And I could prove it with data. So I went on this big tear inside of Federated Department Stores, telling anyone who'd listen, guys, we're a dinosaur heading into the swamp, and we don't have to be. If we had a national name, we could compete with the limited by being called Macy's coast to coast, or pick a name, but everywhere. We could develop the programs. We could do everything to compete. Well, when my business school buddy, we played poker every week and we were on the same little section there. He had just been moved to the Silicon Valley to start working with video game publishers. And he was coming through Dallas in some business, and we were dear friends. So he came over for dinner and we sat at the kitchen table, and he showed me all the data about the coming video game and computers in the home, all the penetration curves going back to the first record players, to the first black and white TVs, to the first alarm clocks. The penetration curves were the same. And he said, there is no way video game machines and the software that goes on them is not going to become an enormous sector. There was not a single video game store in the world. So he's pushing on an open door with me because I have been preaching to anyone who would listen that in any category of consumer products that reaches measurable size, the specialty store channel will be an important, if not dominant, channel of distribution. And I told him all that. I explained, Jim, this is really interesting. Let me tell you why. And by the time we were through, it's like, well, Jim, you got to quit your job at Bain. I have to quit my job at Federated Department Stores, and we got to do this. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, really? So I go home my wife said, what? I said, hey, wait, if Jim does it, because Jim was top of the class in our business school, if Jim thinks it's a good idea, that's our insurance policy. Jim was, of course, going and telling his buddies, accusing being a retailer. He thinks it's a good thing. So we both quit our jobs, and the rest is history. And so when we opened our first store, it's the first software store in the history of the world. We had so much fun for the next 12 years. That's where we went from there.
That is awesome. That is one of the coolest stories. Oh my gosh.